Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and back here with another PlayStation 3 related tutorial with something that we have covered here a few times, but I figured this would deserve a well-needed update here, because even though some of the older videos will work for this will be showing, of course, how to jailbreak your PlayStation 3 and get it from a stock system to a console running a full custom firmware to really take full advantage of what we have available here on the system in the world of Homebrew and all that other fun stuff. I am revisiting this video here because the PlayStation 3 toolset from Gearville is now back online. It is back, it is better than ever, it has been updated for the latest firmware at the time of recording this, and it seems to do the job just as well as before, making the PlayStation 3 jailbreak process simple and easy to do. This is of course made possible thanks to the PS3 exploit team, so I do always want to extend my thanks out to all the people involved here. But with the PS3 toolset back online, a new domain, and a few things changed on the toolset itself, just in terms of some terminology and such, I felt like this would be a good video here to remake and update. Now, to get a few things clear, there's many people who do watch these videos and they might already have a modified PlayStation 3, and that is to say here, if your system is already modified, you do not need to follow along with this video. If you have already jailbroken your PlayStation 3 and you're running a custom firmware on there, you really just need to update the custom firmware like you would with any other update. I will have a link to a video showing how you can update your PS3 using custom firmware linked down below in the description. And if you're using PS3 HIN and you're just trying to update your PS3 HIN, I will also have another video covering how to update your HFW and PS3 HIN. It's going to be a pretty similar process there as well too. However, this video is really only going to be for people who are trying to get from an official firmware on their PlayStation 3 to a custom firmware, or maybe people who have PS3 HIN and they have a compatible PS3 with custom firmware capabilities and they'd like to jailbreak it. This video is going to be for you. Now, keen watchers of the channel might also know that recently I made a video covering the Flash Writer, and while that still works just fine, some people might be wondering what the difference is here with the PS3 toolset. Well, the PS3 toolset is easier to access, it is easier to use, and it does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. However, it is also online only, meaning you do have to have an internet connection to access it. And if anything ever happens to this web page, like it's not accessible or it does go down for whatever reason, the PS3 toolset cannot be used, which is where the Flash Writer does help. All in all, both tools are great and they will get you to the same endpoint. However, the PS3 toolset is going to be easier to use and does a lot more of the heavy lifting for us. So if you have the option, I personally pick the PS3 toolset if it's available. But if for whatever reason you want to keep everything within your local network, or you want to stay offline, or you just want to do this without the toolset or it's not accessible, you can still use the Flash Writer. That is a perfectly capable tool as well. Finally, I do want to say I am covering this here for Firmware 4.90 because this is the current firmware at the time of recording, and this is the latest firmware at the time of recording that the PS3 toolset does support. That is to say here, in the future, if there's new firmware updates for the PS3 and you see that the title, the metadata, as well as the thumbnail have been changed on this video, that means that the process is going to be the same, just on a newer firmware, because that has happened in the past, so just do keep that in mind. I'll probably be saying 4.90 here and there, but if there's a new update like 4.91, 4.92, and everything in the video is reflective of that, like it's updated in the title, that just means that the process is going to be the same as before. Now, with all that being said, let's jump into these prerequisites. You might have heard me talk about custom firmware compatibility, and that is an important thing to note here, because not all systems can take custom firmware. If you have a PlayStation 3 Phat model like this one on screen, congratulations, you're good to go. You don't have to worry about anything else. If you have a slim system like this, you might be able to install custom firmware on it. I'm going to put here a list of models which are confirmed to work with the PS3 custom firmware, some which might work, and some of them which will not work. And you'd have to look on the back of your system and look at the model number there to see the compatibility. However, it also has been known that some third-party resellers, if you've bought your system used, could have also case swapped systems, so I'm going to show you all here in a bit how you can check your minimum firmware version. So if you're unsure if your system can take custom firmware, we're going to figure that out here within a few minutes. Finally, if you have a PS3 Super Slim, this system cannot take custom firmware at all, so you will not be able to use this tutorial. However, if you're one of those people who owns an incompatible Slim or you own a Super Slim, you'll be able to follow along with my PS3 HIN video. Now, it's not the same as custom firmware, however, it does most of what people want custom firmware to do on their systems. So I actually like it. I think it's a great solution, and the benefit of it is that it works on all models of the PlayStation 3. So if you have one of those systems that's not compatible with custom firmware, you might want to give PS3 HIN a try. I don't recommend sleeping on it. It is a pretty good solution for most of what people want to do. Now let's go ahead and check our prerequisites for our system here. First of all, I will have the PS3 Toolset linked down below in the description. And as you can see here, it shows that this supports firmwares 4.75 to 4.90 at the time of recording this video. To check your current firmware version, you can go over to your PlayStation 3, navigate over to Settings, go down to System Settings, scroll all the way down to System Information. Now look at the version number here, and if the version number is within that compatibility range, then congratulations, you can continue on with this. If you're in a lower firmware version, then you're going to need to update to the latest firmware it would be recommended that is supporting this here. In my case, I'm on 4.90, and this should work for what we're doing. However, if you're on a higher firmware than what PS3 Toolset supports, you are going to need to wait for a solution, whether PS3 Toolset or maybe the flash writer is updated. So you'll just need to wait a bit on that. Now with our model and our firmware checked out, we're going to need to complete our prerequisites, which means we're going to need to make sure, of course, we have a PlayStation 3. We're going to need it connected to the internet. We're also going to need to have a USB flash drive so we can transfer files to and from a computer, as well as run a few things. And it would be recommended to have a computer here as well too. I'm going to be using a Windows-based computer for this. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get into checking our minimum firmware version. To do this here, we're going to need to set everything up, and there's going to be a few things that we have to do prior. One of them is going to be setting the proper internet time on our system. To do this, we can scroll all the way over to our settings, go to Date and Time Settings. We're going to set automatically to on, and we can now come up to Date and Time. We're going to set via the internet. And as you can see, it's now set this up here. So once we have our accurate time dialed in, we should be good on that front. We now also need to make a separate profile. So you don't have to worry about the one you have here, but we're going to make a separate profile and use that only for the jailbreaking process. And at the end of this video, you can delete it. Now here, we're going to create a new user, and I'm just going to call this, it doesn't matter what it's called, but I'm going to call this JB for jailbreak. We'll just call it that. Hit start, hit OK, and once that user is created, we're going to sign into that user account. Here we go. Now what we can do is go over to our network settings, go to the internet browser, and we're going to clean up our internet browser. So once this loads up, press the triangle button, go to Tools, go down to Home Page, and we're going to set this to use blank page and hit OK. Go to triangle yet again, Tools, we're going to delete our cookies. We're now going to delete our search history. We're going to delete our cache. And finally, we're going to delete the authentication information. And we're now going to close out of this web page. Once that's all closed, open up your internet browser yet again. And once we're here, we can press triangle, go to File, Address Entry, delete this, and we're going to go to the website we need for the toolset. It's going to be this exact website, ps3toolset.com. If you need to see it in a different format, or if it does change, I'm also going to have it linked down below in the description of this video. Now once that's dialed in, you can hit enter and wait for this to load. It might take a little bit of time to load up here, so don't worry, but as you can see, this should come up here. Do you want to run the plugin? You always want to say yes to this. So go ahead and say yes and wait for everything to load up. And here we go. Once it brings you this message saying that it's all complete, you are all ready to go. And there's also this mention here of donations as well too, which are always helpful for Begearville and the PS3 exploit team. So once you understand this here, you can navigate to OK and continue on. Now you want to come up here and you're going to go to the System Manager and enter the System Manager. It is going to take a bit of time to set everything up, so just let it do its thing. Now once it all loads in, it should look a little something like this. And as you can see right here where it says CFW compatible PS3, mine has a green check mark. And if you are able to continue on, yours should also have a green check mark, meaning that your minimum firmware version is low enough that it can take a full custom firmware. If you do not have a green check mark right here, unfortunately you cannot continue on further and you need to look at PS3 HIN. Now don't worry all too much, thankfully PS3 HIN does work pretty well for what most people need it to do. So again, I would still recommend PS3 HIN if you do not have a compatible PlayStation 3. However, if you do have a compatible PS3, then you are in luck and you can continue on. So what I would recommend here is pressing the select button and add this page to your bookmarks. That way we can easily access it later on. Now let's go ahead and close out of this web page. There we go. And now we're going to go over to our computer to get all the downloads and everything set up. So make sure you have a USB drive on hand and move over to your computer. I'm going to have links for everything down below in the description for everything that I'm going to show you. But first of all, for our USB formatting, I would recommend downloading Rufus. It's not required, however, we're going to need our USB drive formatted to FAT32, which I know larger drives aren't as easy to format like that in Windows, and we're also going to need it set to MBR, not GPT. So we can set that all manually here. If you're going to use this, you can scroll down here and just download the latest portable version. We don't need to really install it unless we want to. We're also going to need Little Ballop's Pi PS3 checker. You can go to his GitHub page and you're going to need to look for the Pi PS3 checker standalone package. This is typically updated pretty regularly whenever there is a new update out. So you'll just need to click on this file here, and now you need to click on download and save the zip file somewhere you can easily find it. Next up, we're going to need a custom firmware. Now in recent times, it looks like Evonat has really taken up releasing new custom firmwares for the PlayStation 3. So I'm going to have a link to the latest Evonat custom firmware linked in the description here. This is really what's going to be utilized at this point, and this is what's going to make our PS3 truly do whatever we want it to here and truly unlock the power of it all. Now, I would recommend just giving this a good read here, just seeing all the features that are available, the Cobra updates and such on here, as well as the wonderful credits. And there's a whole lot more you can see, like the models this was tested in, improvements to the Xia plugin, and so much more, like for save game conversion if you ever want to do that. The main thing we do need here is the download. So we're going to scroll down to the bottom, and you might be overwhelmed with all the options here, but I'm going to quickly break down what these will be. So first of all, if you're jailbreaking, you're on a CEX system or a KEX system like this right here, which means it is a retail system. So we're not going to look at DEX or DPEX or anything that has DEX in it. That's not going to apply to us. Now here, if you're just getting something like this, this is a standard firmware. If you get something that says no BD, that means you don't have a Blu-ray drive or you have a broken Blu-ray drive. No BT means you have no Bluetooth board or a broken Bluetooth board. No BT, no BD means both of those are broken or missing. And finally, OC means an overclocked variant of the custom firmware. Now, you might be looking at CEX here, and you might be noticing that there's several variants. There's regular CEX, and there's PEX CEX. Now, PEX essentially means that Evonat has taken some older modules related to development systems, and he has ported them into the newer updates. So I would actually recommend here, if you are ever interested in maybe dipping your toes in converting this to a development system or using development capabilities on here, which is possible, you can get the PEX CEX variant here and just choose what you want. I would just get the PEX CEX standard because my system is working fine and I'm not interested in overclocking it. If you don't ever want to mess around with the debug side of it here, like debugger development, you can just go with the standard CEX variant. For all of that here, again, you would just click on whichever firmware you are wanting, and then you would download and save this somewhere you can easily find it. To extract out that custom firmware, I would recommend something like 7-zip. It's easy to use, free, and it will get the job done. You can just download this and install it on your computer. As long as your system is compatible, we are going to need some Homebrew as well too, and typically the first piece of Homebrew I recommend people install is Multiman. This is a great game and backup loader, so I'll have this linked down below in the description. Of course, you can go to Multiman, and even though this says 4.85, this will still work on newer firmwares, so just download the latest version of the base Multiman and save it somewhere you can easily find it. Finally, I would recommend getting an MD5 checker such as, well, MD5 checker. This will allow us to verify our custom firmware download and make sure we are all good to continue on here. So we can just download this program or whatever equivalent you're going to use and just download this and save it somewhere, again, you can easily find it. Perfect. Now that we have everything downloaded, first let's go ahead and work on formatting this. I'm going to be using Rufus here. Now the reason why I'm recommending Rufus is because I have my USB drive right here, and I'm going to show you all. If you're just using Windows or whatever OS you're using, you can right click and format the USB drive, back up any data you do care about from here, so make sure it's backed up, and then we're going to work on formatting it. Now my drive is small enough that I can just pick FAT32, quick format is fine, volume label is fine, default allocation is okay, start okay, and as you can see it formats to FAT32 with no issue, which you can check by right clicking, checking the properties, and verifying the file system right here. However, some people might not be able to select FAT32 easily, or you might not be able to format it to MBR, which means that you will not be able to get it to read on your PlayStation 3, which is why Rufus comes in play here. So close out of this, we can close out of this window here. Make sure you do note the drive letter down, which mine is H, and we're going to double click on Rufus. If a UAC window comes up, say yes, and it's up to you if you want to allow it to check for updates. So now make sure your USB drive is selected. For boot selection, we're going to select non-bootable, and we're going to select MBR. This is super important. The volume label can be anything, and the second important part is going to be the file system, which we can select FAT32. So these are the two most important portions. Make sure you're set to MBR, and make sure you're set to FAT32. Once all that is set, we can click on Start and hit OK. And there we go. Once we close out of there, we can open up our window, right click, check this out, and look at that. The file system is set to FAT32, and I know that it is MBR. So with all that set up, we don't need to put anything on here just yet. Our USB drive should be good and blank and ready to continue. So we can right click, eject this, and move it over to our PS3. For the remainder of this video here up until the end, you are going to want to make sure you're signed into the JB account, or really the new account you made specifically for jailbreaking. Make sure you're signed into that. Now make sure you plug in your USB drive, and you should see it show up within any of these here, like music, or you can find it within video, or you can find it within photos. As long as it shows up like this, we should be good to continue on. If it does not show up here, that means you need to format it to MBR and FAT32. That's incredibly important. If you don't do that properly, it's not going to show up on the PS3. As long as it does show up here, we can go right back to our internet browser, open this up, and this time around, instead of typing everything, we're going to press the select button and go down to the PS3 Toolset. Again, whenever you get this message here asking if you want to run the plugin, always say yes. And here we go. Once we get the messages that our toolset is ready and we see the maintenance cost window come up, again, if you ever want to donate to them, that is definitely recommended here. But once we hit OK, we can close out of that, and you want to come right back up to where we were before and go to the System Manager. Again, let this all load up and do its thing. Now, once we're back at this page, we're going to hit the flash memory option and press the X button here, and you want to select Save Flash Memory Backup. Press X on this, and it's going to bring up this page here. We need to select our USB drive, which is why it's really recommended and you really need to have that USB drive recognized on the PS3. As long as you see it here, you should see something like dev USB and some numbers. And from here, if you want to put it in a nested folder or make sure we can read it, you can press this button and make sure this pops up, but I'm just going to put this on the root of the USB drive. So I'm just going to highlight the USB drive like that, and now hit save for our dump.hex file. Now give this a few moments. This is going to depend entirely on how big your system flash is, as well as how fast or slow your USB drive is. But it's now going to dump the system flash, and as you can see, this one only took 8 seconds. So we're going to click on close, grab your USB drive, so unplug it from the PS3 and take it over to your PC. We need to verify this and make sure it is a good dump. Alright, so now that we're back at our computer, you can go to your USB drive and you should see a dump.hex file right here. This is going to be important because this is our system backup. So in case anything does go wrong with your system here during the modification or patching process, if you have a good dump available, worst case scenario, you'll be able to flash this back over to the system using a hardware flasher or referring this to someone who does have a hardware flasher on hand who can restore your system. So make sure you have this file, it is very important. But I'm going to right click, copy this out, and I'm going to paste it here onto my desktop. You'll also see here that I have all the other downloads that we've needed because we can now continue on further with this after we check our system dump. So you should first have the Pi PS3 Checker standalone package. If you're using 7-zip, you can right click this, go to 7-zip, and extract it into its own folder. Now with the folder here, we can open this up. I'm going to move the dump.hex right here, and it says here, drag and drop your dump here, which is exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to drag the dump.hex file and drop it onto this BAT file. Now once we run that, you're going to get the Pi PS3 Checker launcher, and after a few seconds it should run through that dump file. Now ideally we're looking for 0 dangers and 0 warnings, and this is actually a good example here. Typically, if you have any dangers, you do not want to continue on. If you have any warnings here, we can actually check them here. If you have like 1 warning, like what I'm seeing, then typically it's going to be okay to continue on. However, if you have like 5 or 10 or 20 warnings, you don't want to continue on. So if you have any warnings or any dangers, what I would recommend is closing out of the browser here on the PS3. And from here, you could try to reinstall the same firmware that you are running, access the toolset yet again, and then do another dump and run it through the Pi PS3 Checker. So here I'm actually going to look at what this is. So this is my ROS1 hash, seems to have a warning. And yeah, I am seeing it here. The ROS0 header is okay, but the hash seems to have a warning, just unknown. In all honesty, this might be because I have just reverted this from a custom firmware to a stock system. So I'm actually going to give that a shot here and try to reinstall my official firmware. Alright, so what I just did was actually take the official 4.90 firmware file, install it yet again on my PS3, and did another dump here, as I said I would do. So we're going to just drag and drop this here, and check this out. As you can see, we have the same number of checks, but this time around we have 0 dangers and 0 warnings. So I would feel safer flashing this over now and patching this system since we have a good dump. That's fantastic to see. I'm going to close out of this. Now, because I know this first dump does have a warning, I'm going to choose to remove that one, but the second dump here, this one, now that you've verified you have a good dump, you want to make sure you save it somewhere you can always access it, like you want to back it up on cloud storage, you want to put it in a safe place where you can back this up, and you also want to really key it to your system, because this is this console's specific dump file. So for example, I know this one is my L model, so I could call this one like CECHL, or you can put your serial number for it or whatever you want to do, but you want to name this something that you can verify later on, and you want to save this somewhere you can always access it in case anything goes wrong with your system now or in the future. So now with all that said, we have verified that we have a good dump, and let's work on setting up the rest of our USB drive. I'm going to go into the USB drive itself, and I'm actually going to clear out all of the folders and files here. So I'm just going to delete those. Now that we have a nice fresh USB drive, let's get everything transferred over that we will need. First, I'm going to direct you to the custom firmware that you have downloaded. Whether you've chosen CEX or PEX variant, you're just going to grab your archive, right click it, and if you're using 7-zip, extract it into its own folder. So I'm going to right click and copy out this folder, go over to our USB drive, and in the root of the USB drive, you're going to paste it right here. Now, even if your custom firmware that you are picking at this point does not have the folder structure set up for it, it needs to look exactly like this. You need to have a PS3 folder, all uppercase. You need to have an update folder, all uppercase in that, and the update file will say ps3 updat.pup. You need to verify the file name extension. If you're using Windows, you can click on View, Show, File Name Extensions, make sure that is enabled. It needs to look exactly like that. Now we need to verify the MD5 hash to make sure that we have downloaded and transferred this over successfully. So typically on the download page, or maybe in a folder here or in a file, you will see something related to an MD5. Here it is a MD5.txt. And if you double click this, it's going to bring up this text document with this random assortment of numbers and letters. You're going to want to right click and copy this out for later and close out of this. Now next we're going to need our MD5 checker, which for this I'm going to be using, well, MD5 checker. I'm going to right click this. Using 7-zip, I'm going to extract it into its own folder. And when we open up MD5 checker, we can open up the executable here, and it should look a little something like this. Now, it's very simple to use this, thankfully. In our USB drive, so not where we downloaded the custom firmware, in the USB drive itself, open it up, go into PS3, update, ps3 updat.pup, and we're going to drag and drop this onto MD5 checker. Once it verifies, double click this, and inside of this text box, right click and paste that MD5 hash that you copied over. And as long as it says same, then you are all ready to go. So we can click on close, and we can close out of MD5 checker. Finally, we can go back over to our USB drive, and we can copy over any Homebrew that we want. I have Multiman right here, and this, as well as any other Homebrew, is going to come in a PKG format. So I'm just going to right click, copy this, and paste it in the root of the USB drive next to our PS3 folder. So we should be ready to go on until the end of this video here, and this should be the last time we're on our computer, at least for this portion, thankfully. So again, you're going to need the custom firmware here, make sure it's verified, and you're going to need to put any Homebrew that you want to install later on right here. Once all that is done, we can right click, eject our USB drive, take it over to our PS3 and plug it into the PS3 for the last steps. Now back over at the PS3, if you kept your web page up here, it might be better to actually close this out. I did try to load up the patch we needed here immediately, and it seemed to just kind of hang at waiting to download here. So either way, once we're back over at the XMB, you can make sure your USB drive is plugged in and recognized, and we're just going to go through the same process as before. Just open up the browser, go to select, press PS3 Toolset, and go through the whole process of loading up the toolset again. Of course, here you do want to run the plugin, and once all is good to go, we can hit OK, scroll back up to the System Manager, and enter the System Manager and wait for it to load in. Now once we're here, again, you want to make sure at this point you have dumped your flash memory and you've made sure you have a good flash backup, because we're now going to work on patching our system flash. And do keep in mind at this point here, once we start patching, we don't want to interrupt our system. Put your controller down, don't mess with it, and do not cut power to your system. If you do interrupt this process here, it is possible you could brick your PlayStation 3. So as long as you're all good to continue, scroll down here to Flash Memory Patch, press X, and hit Load Patch via HTTP. Press X yet again, and wait for it to download. It's now going to download the exact patch we need and verify that it is a good and safe download. And there we go. Once we're good, click on Close. As you can see, all is looking good here. And now come back up to Flash Memory Patch. Come down here to Apply Loaded Patch. And it is going to give us this warning right here. Now, yet again, as I said, you do not want to cut power to your system. You don't want to interrupt this process. You want to let it do its thing. In fact, once you press yes, you want to just put your controller down and don't touch anything until it is done patching. As long as you are all good to continue on here, you can go over to yes, press X, and leave your controller alone. It's now going to work on the entire patching process here and just let it do its thing. It will take a few minutes for most systems. However, if you have one of the earlier PS3 Phat models with a NAND flash type, this will only take a few seconds to complete here. Either way, you're just going to leave your PS3 alone and do not mess around with it until it is done patching. You'll even notice right here at times it's going to look like it might be stuck. Like mine didn't do anything for well over a minute and then it jumped up to 20% right here. Again, just trust the process, let it do its thing. Do not touch your controller or your system until this is done. So there we go, it should say that we can now reboot our system and our patch is applied successfully. It took me just under 3 minutes to do this here, so we can click on close. Now close out of your browser completely. Now we can go ahead, reboot the system itself by coming over to users. If we want to do this here, go to turn off system and turn off your system completely, then turn it back on. Now once your system reboots, we can log back into our jailbreak profile because why not? And make sure your USB drive is still plugged in, make sure it is recognized. Now go over to settings, system update, go to update via storage media, and as long as you set this up properly, it should show the custom firmware that you have downloaded and copied over. If it does so, we can hit OK, let it load up, and we're now going to begin the process of actually jailbreaking the system. Because we have patched it here, but we now need to install custom firmware to give us all of the opportunities and everything that we're looking for a jailbroken PlayStation 3. So go ahead, let it copy over the update data to the system. It's then going to reboot and it's going to go through the update process. Once your system reboots, you should come to a system update screen like this. It's going to check for update data. If you want to, you can press the PS button on your controller, but if not, it's going to do this all automatically here for you. And as you can see here, it's now going through the installation process. Again, here, you do not want to mess around with your system. Just leave it alone for a few minutes, let it do its thing. It's going to install and reboot. And once it reboots, you should finally have a custom firmware jailbroken PlayStation 3. Alright, so now once the system reboots, we actually don't need that jailbroken profile. So if you do want to get rid of it, we can, of course, log into it here. I'm going to come over to the profile, go to delete, say yes, since we don't need that now. And we can use our original profile if you were accustomed to using another profile on here. Now once we're all signed into that, congratulations, you should see your XMB looks a little bit different here because we now have custom firmware tools. We also have PS3 here and the package manager. Now for our last step, since we have installed custom firmware, we now need to install Homebrew. And to do that, it's pretty simple to do. Of course, make sure your USB drive is still plugged in. Now go to the package manager, go to install package files, standard, and we're going to install whatever Homebrew we have here. Just tap the X button on here and wait for it to install. And there we go, that's how you install this as well as any other piece of Homebrew. So once we give it a few seconds here, we're all good to go. We can hit back, and as you can see down here, we now have Multiman. To give it a shot here, let's go ahead and fire it up. So here it's going to give you an introduction as well as do the initial data install, and it might do a little bit of a soft reboot here, so to speak, but once it is all good to continue on, you should see the app will restart, and then it will actually get us into Multiman once the standard theme is applied. I will say here to anybody who is using Multiman for the first time, I'd recommend going over to settings, and you're going to look for theme audio, and I'd recommend disabling that. I've just noticed from my experience, if you have the music running in the background, not only can get annoying after some time, but also you might run into some performance issues if you are transferring files to and from this via FTP and the music is running in the background. So with all that said here, we do have Multiman, we have our first piece of Homebrew up and running. However, you might notice there's not all too much that we can do here at the moment. Well, I do have a full video showing what you can do with Multiman and everything, so if you want to check that out, you are more than welcome to do so, where I break everything down with Multiman, and you can actually get some usage with backing up your game discs and playing them off an internal or an external storage device. Now with that, let's go ahead and close out of this here. So I'm going to come over to MMCM, we're going to quit, and here we go. At this point, we are really all good to go by the end of this video here. So congratulations, you should have gone from a stock to a working full custom firmware PlayStation 3. You'll also probably notice if you look at Multiman that it's changed to MMCM. Don't worry about that, that is totally fine, it's still the same application. But either way, welcome to the world of having a modified PlayStation 3. From here, you can check out some other things such as, of course, the multi-man guide showing how to set up multi-man, play games on there and all that. I also have videos showing things such as Webman if you are wanting to play games from other external devices, install them from there, and of course get Webman on here for some better fan control, and even some other little tweaks such as expanding the internal storage on your PS3, not really by replacing the hard drive, of course you can still do that, but actually just by running a little unlocker application which reduces the amount of storage which is reserved on the PS3, so you can squeeze a little more out of it, which really helps out quite a bit. Either way, I do want to give some shoutouts and thank yous here at the end, of course. I'd like to give a huge shout out and thank you to the PlayStation 3 exploit team. Of course, they are a great group of folks over there, and their continued support through everything for the PlayStation 3 has just been absolutely awesome here. So I will have their new site linked down below in the description. It's just a new domain, new site, but still all the same stuff that we are familiar with. So you can check it out here for the latest updates and such. And of course, if you are wanting to donate, the options are available here. And of course, another thank you goes out to B. Gearville for his fantastic PS3 toolsets that we are now seeing a nice return to form of, as well as updates and such on here. Now, if you are looking to help donate as well too, you can check out the help and donation section, and you can donate here as well using several different options, which I would always recommend. Typically, as I say on these videos here, think about it like this. Back in the day, you would have had to buy a flasher to modify your PS3 or pay someone to do it. Well, just take a fraction of what you would have spent and donate it over to the team if you so choose to. It does make a world of difference, and it does help out not only yourself, but also the greater community at hand here. Either way, that is about it for this video here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped out, and if you did like this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it because you don't like jailbroken PS3s for whatever reason and custom firmware, that's fine too. A dislike is also fine. But as I always say, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone.